That's what I was mentioning earlier. It takes us back in time to the 70s and the 80s, defining economic development by geography. And very clearly, Scottish Enterprise and HIE have moved on to a very new model, doing away with that geographical drive to identify areas of need and respond to that need, and to build up the infrastructure in those areas to ensure that people in those areas have work supplied to them in a way that doesn't require them to move, to picking winners, if not companies, and certainly winning sectors. It's a very different model, looking for areas to maximise growth rather than to move the whole economy and keep everybody where they are. And if we go to an area, let's go back in time to this model, or indeed borrow from England the model of enterprise zones, we're creating a tension within policy between geography and sector. And it's not very clear, if we're going to do that, where the priority is going to lie. Interesting you mentioned England as well, because one of the curiosities about the Scottish Parliament in 12 years is that it's, although we have people coming into Edinburgh every week to represent their constituencies, very little sort of regional politics gets played at Holyrood. It's very national politics, and the current government, for one very good reason, they've got a referendum with a national cause to fight. In England, the north-south divide is a very lively issue in the UK government, much more so than it was really under the previous Labour government. And that's for some political reasons, for some coalition reasons, but it's also because the way the English economy has developed since deindustrialisation, for much of it, it has become, I think, a lot of it has become a hinterland for this huge economic dynamo of London. Yeah. The bits of England, if you go to Leeds, thriving finance centre, basically it's the crumbs from the table from London, they're very substantial crumbs. That is the kind of way that the English economy has developed and is developing, and that's something to which the UK government, the English parts of the UK government, have to respond. We have a very different type of geographical economic challenge.
Thank you, Mark. Another question, please. Yep.
Thanks, Allan. I'm kind of getting a sense of deja vu. It's probably 5 years since I last sat at one of these EDAS events, and we're actually sitting talking about the same issues. Procurement's failing. You know, early intervention, as Richard said, we've had, I think, 5 reports, Susan Beacon being the latest since that time. We're talking about the strategy of our enterprise agencies, which is not doing any better now than it was then. I mean, actually, the question for me is, how are we actually going to make this change happen? I mean, what do we have to do to make things happen? When we talk about information and budget spending, I mean, Scottish Government previously, if you looked at all the departments, the funding levels never changed. It wasn't going to needs, it wasn't going to the right intervention. And if you take the present moment, everybody buys into the prevention agenda, let's say in health, for example, because as Colin Weir, the Improvement Service says, we've got £10 billion of negative demand. How are we actually going to do anything about that? I mean, you know, we're sitting here talking about economic development strategy, and I agree totally with Ian in terms of more entrepreneurship within individuals, but actually within organisations as well, to help them actually grow better. But at the end of the day, all these things, we know procurement's failing, we know commissioning's failing, but what are we actually going to do about it?
Yeah, it's a good question now. It's often worries me that there's almost a consensus around certain kinds of things that will not do well enough unless they take procurement. It's not a new argument that procurement is difficult and onerous for SMEs, whether they be social enterprises or conventional. We all know that. We almost need to go in the other direction. Just take that as an example. How do we get the kind of change on some of these fundamental issues that that's the process?
Can I just say, I mean, it is my opinion that Scotland is by far the most conservative part of the United Kingdom, by some distance. I mean, we've had 12 years of devolution now, and we have not had any major programme of reform across any of the major public services. There, you know, lots has gone on south of the border, and not very much has happened because we're still basically in the public sector supplier dominated rather than having much kind of a big consumer voice. So some things are starting to fray at the edges. We're getting a self-directed support bill coming through next year, sorry, at the end of this year, which will give care clients more of a control over how services are delivered to them. But we're essentially, it seems to me, very much process-oriented and in the hands of the suppliers. I've sat through 4 budgets, and we're talking about spending it's between 27 and 30 billion pounds. What has been needed to get the support of the to get a budget through is a variation of maybe 40 million. Apart from that, everything just goes through by formula. So there have been no major movements between the major pillars of government spending in Scotland. There appears to be no appetite for major structural change in the public sector.
What do we do about it?
Well, that was the... Do you know what's not come up? The big society.
The big society?
Because what was interesting about that when it got underway in England, because I've lived in Cornwall for 6 years, and you can't get a more economically backward area than Cornwall, which has failed to capitalise on anything. And economic development is probably hated by the Tories. Well, it's certainly hated by Eric Pickles, who's in charge of communities and local government. They really despise it. And there's a tough warfare going on with Vince Cable and about this whole thing. But it is moving towards the basis of the kind of thinking was Thatcherism, privatisation does everything, the market will sort everything out. Brownism, the state will look after you. And provided we all follow that model. And the big society is really saying, where is the role for self-help, mentoring, people giving something back? And actually, now, that's as far as it goes. It's not really been put into position down there. It is purely an idea. But it is happening in some areas. Sheffield and Leeds have started to take this forward. Some areas are veering back towards the local authority taking control, but there is an awful lot more. The mentoring scheme that's coming in to replace Business Link is voluntary. You know, we actually have a very good model for that in Scotland. It's Prince's Scottish Youth Business Trust, which does a fantastic job. But David's absolutely right. Nobody's looked at what's happened across the border, and it is shocking, and it is chaotic, but something radically different's going to emerge. Don't know whether it's going to be a turkey or an eagle that flies, but something's going to happen. We cannot carry on just ignoring it, because it's changed the dynamic.
I'd offer one comment, suggestion, which is, what do we do about some of this? I always thought that the speech element that Tony Blair made at one point when he was Prime Minister, which he talked about the scars on his back from dealing with reform of the public services, was fundamentally mistaken. I can understand some of the sentiment he was expressing in that speech, but the way in which he went on to develop it, I see the fundamental problem with public services in not developing new things. It's in stopping the old things that we have done for years and years and years and allowing the new to take place. And there is a relevance here to your putative brain operation, which is that we still operate on, for example, a model of health service provision, which is enormously costly, and which is based around a model that is 50, 60, 70 years old, where in some of our district general hospitals, both in Scotland and in England, the man or woman who might operate on somebody's brain was doing a hip yesterday and an appendectomy the day before. I exaggerate, but in some locations that's not far off. And if you look at radicalism in terms of producer interest, you may have noticed the speech from the President of the Royal College of Nursing last week where there was a call for 100 district general hospitals in England to be closed or merged or taken over by better equipped general hospitals, a recognition of a changing set of technologies which say that by and large healthcare can be better improved by reviewing and changing exactly what we do. The same applies to education, the same applies to a variety of other activities. Once we take away the immediate personal dynamic of care, for example, you get into a number of interesting areas. And I happen to think that Scotland has, notwithstanding what you say, David, and I agree with a lot of it, Scotland should have a real opportunity to break ground here in terms of our distribution of population. We have an enormously tightly concentrated population in the central belt, and then we have a widely dispersed population. Levels of rural sparsity, some of you know this very well, in Scotland are far greater than they are in most parts of England. And we should therefore be pioneering the midway somewhere between the Flying Doctor of Australia and the intensive I live next to Bart's model of healthcare that dominates health provision in England. We could do more, but that requires courage, but primarily by politicians and a longer-term view. And as one elected representative said to me a good while ago, it's stuck in my mind, we didn't get where we are by not doing things for people.